Welcome, everyone, to Overtime with Coach Blu and Athletic Director Marissa.
Hello.
So good to have you guys back. Lots of stuff on the horizon. Holy cow, our calendar's getting busier and busier.
Yes.
But if you have some time, you want to, maybe surf that interweb, jump on addicttoathlete.org. You'll find all of our backlog content. You'll find information about the team, how to get one started, recovery coach training. More importantly, you'll find links, Marissa, to our upcoming events. First and foremost, in June, our No One Left Behind half marathon.
Yes, this is the funnest event. It's a team half marathon, and it's not a relay. You run it together with your two best friends. So teams of three, starting together, finishing together. That's what recovery is all about. No one does it alone. So we're doing teams together, and it is June 15th, Spanish Fork, Utah. Please get on our website. You can go to addicttoathlete.org, and then it's under a drop-down menu at the top under races, and it is the No One Left Behind.
It is a awesome course too. I love the trail hugs the river, and so you get quite a bit of shade. There's a few sections where you can work on that tan, but most of it's got the cool breeze. You're in the shade, and very little to zero traffic at all. You cross one road that's that we have a designated person there to help you cross.
Yep.
But it's gorgeous.
It's such a gorgeous view everywhere you go.
Yeah. So jump on there and let's get you registered. It's a great way to, I guess if you're wanting to do this, but maybe you don't know if you have the motivation, that's why you have someone there to support you, right? Well, we got a little bit of a slow start, so we're going to jump right into today's topic. In my private practice here in the Addict Athlete home base, I'm seeing a lot of individuals recently who have been coming and seeking counseling, some marriage counseling, some couples counseling. And I love it when a couple decides that they don't want to just throw in the towel and call it quits, that they'd rather see what's at the core of this. And I will be honest with you and tell you 9 times out of 10, it's a breakdown in core communication. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast. We've talked about core communication, the control talk, the reactive listening that just keeps throwing, like fuel on the fire. And beyond that, though, there's a lot of other little miscellaneous things that we need to be aware of. And I think you and I had a really great experience when we were first dating. Beyond that little situation where I was acting like an idiot. I'm not talking about that part. I'm talking about once it was discovered I was acting like an idiot, then we sought some counseling and some therapy. And it was awesome because I went there first and foremost for me. You guys have all heard the story where I walked out the first session. It was pretty funny. But when we came back and started getting down to business and started realizing that functionally some of the issues I had stemmed from absentee parents and some very deep neglect. And when Marissa and I decided that, when I conned her into marrying me, he said, you might want to start bringing her with you. And so there for about a year, we went to therapy. And it was an amazing, I think, opportunity. I didn't realize the value of it until much later.
I think it's blessed us more than anything else.
I think so too. And I counsel a lot of the young folks, I can tell you that now, right?
Yeah.
All these young bucks.
We're old now.
Yeah.
Mostly if you use the word folks, right?
These 20-year-olds and whatnot. And, I say that there's a lot that can happen in requesting counseling before you're married. Because typically they say that first year is the most difficult. Mm-hmm. And our therapist gave us a book to read, and I've used this book in countless interactions with couples that have come in needing help. And it's John Gottan. And John Gottman's 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work has been a resource, and I would say, and I'm going to attribute a lot of what he taught in this book to not just our success, but to a lot of other people that take the time to read it together. So this was, in the year of our Lord 2000, and it was in 1999. Yeah, 1999. And we got this book, and back then again, there was no MP3 players, no phones and anything. So when we'd go places, when we would drive somewhere, we'd go on little road trips. She'd read it, and we would do some of the workouts and stuff that.
Yeah, like each chapter has kind of homework assignments and little tasks that you need to work on to learn the content for that day.
But the coolest thing about John Gottan is that he studied what makes marriages work, not the easy thing that most people go to, and that's what makes them fall apart. Because it's easy to kind of pick out each other's follies and to kind of find out the recipe to disaster.
Yeah, many people can identify multiple reasons that marriages don't work, but he went and he found people who had been married, I think 40 or 35 plus years and started researching what are they doing differently than other people? Why are these marriages holding on longer?
Yeah. And so he created in his research department this thing called the marriage lab. And it was, a simulation of a living room, just like a normal living room, kitchen kind of thing. And he'd have the people that were participating come and just be there. And they spend a little bit of time there. And he got so good that he could start predicting whether or not these marriages were going to last, if they were in jeopardy or they were going to end within the first 5 to 10 minutes of their interactions. And it's so telling that these mannerisms, these things that we do, they're kind of universal. And so the cool thing about what John did was say, if we see these things, these issues, there's an antidote. There's something you can do, but you've got to be aware of it first and foremost. Now, you've heard this, that, what do they say? Like most all of marriages end because of finances. Yeah, I don't believe that. And the reason why I don't believe that is because I think it's a breakdown, again, in communication, right? Because if we're communicating about finances, then we're not going to have financial issues, or we're going to have a plan to get out of it, right? And I caught this new thing on YouTube recently. This dude's name's Caleb, and he does all these little audits with these people. And they go there bringing their budgets and stuff, and he goes through all these just unnecessary purchases, and he loses his head and gives some good advice and stuff. But these young couples, they have such a hard time navigating some of this difficult topic, because it's not a fun topic to discuss finances, not even, for established couples. But the neat thing about what John, started to kind of look at was the very first indicator that would predict if a marriage was in trouble was how did it come together? Was it a harsh startup, as he calls it? And a harsh startup means that it was maybe rushed. Maybe there was, some falling out or some drifting in the relationship. Maybe there was a pregnancy or a rush to the altar, so to speak. And, some of these small things that could look like just small little speed bumps actually create what's called the 4 horsemen. And the 4 horsemen, he subcategorizes these into these quadrants. Go through, Marissa, the 4, and then let's dive into each of these, because this is how he would predict. He would see which of the horsemen were present, and if or not there was an ability to kind of combat that, kind of counteract it. And most of the time there wasn't. So there's 4 of them. Yeah.
So he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in relationships. And, and I love how well he simplifies some things, because again, we talk about issues and problems, and everyone's got their own, and you think it's a ton of different things, but it really came down to some of these 4. The first one is criticism, verbally attacking personality or character. That's the first horseman. The second one is contempt, attacking the sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. If you have kind of a deep stabbing that you're attacking towards your partner, contempt problem. Third is defensiveness, victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack and reverse the blame. So what do we do here? Okay. The last one is stonewalling, withdrawing to avoid conflict and convey disapproval, distance, and separation.
That's my favorite one. I like that horseman. He's mine. We're riders together, being stonewalling. So what does this mean? Okay. It means that these interactions that begin to kind of play out, whether it's in John's lab or if it's in your living room or your bedroom, these are some of the indicators that stuff's not going right, that something needs to take place. And so to dive into it, there are some things you can do to kind of balance these things out and to call your attention to it. So that first one with the criticism and the cynicism of barking orders,
personal attacks.
Mm-hmm. First of all, before they do that, what does that look like in a marriage? What would that look like in a normal, abnormal conversation with a spouse? Yeah,
you're always doing this. Mm-hmm. You always come home late. You never show me that you love me. It's just kind of attacking.
If you cared, you would. Yeah.
Which, we've got to be able to talk, but here's how John gives us.
But think about it. Hold on one sec. Yeah. Think about it. We all have some complaints about our spouses. We all do. I mean,
nobody's perfect.
No one's perfect. But this is a little bit deeper. This is a complaint. This is kind of like a more personal attack, right? Yeah. This isn't just man, you always leave your shoes here, in the living room.
And then it's a little deeper, you're sloppy, you're a mess, and kind of attacking not only the behavior, but attacking the character and the person involved.
Absolutely.
And calling them name calling. Like it starts with little simple things, and then soon it starts getting into maybe some name calling and attacking the person themselves.
Yeah. So what's the antidote to that?
The first one he says is doing a gentle startup, something that's a little more calm, and talking about your feelings using I statements and express a positive need rather than you do this. And to me, it's the always and nevers. Which is really hard. We went through this before we got married, and we still do this. And so it still causes a problem if we're not careful.
Wait a minute, we do?
Well, I don't know if we attack on the character, but we do. I often will get mad, and you always do this, and you never. Yeah, it's hard. But
I just had a memory pop in there. Whenever our kids do something dumb, it's always like, you always teach them, or you've taught them to, like, what? When did I teach them that? That's not. Yeah, what are you talking about?
But it's remembering no one does something always every time. You know what I mean? Like, say you could and it's just trying to even not attack, but just saying, I feel hurt when you do A, B, and C. I like that. Forgotten. I feel, and just kind of.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
And this is why I think core communication goes well with this kind of stuff. But there's a difference between a complaint and then that criticism, right? And I like what John has here. He says, a complaint would look like something like this. Maybe you're saying to your partner, I wish you had told me earlier that you were too tired to be with the family tonight. And I'm really disappointed. But then I got very embarrassed when, you pushed me away when I wanted to be intimate with you. That's the complaint, right? That's like, okay, well, yeah. But the criticism and that Horseman rides in and he says something like, why are you always so cold and selfish? It was really nasty of you to lead me on like that. What's your problem? You're frigid. There's emotion to that, right?
And it's, attacking. You are this and you are the problem, rather than the complaint is starting with the I side. And, I wish you had mentioned something earlier. Yeah, maybe I would have been upset. However, I was more hurt by, instead of attacking the person.
That startup, that soft startup, that calm startup, that's going to be the most important thing. If you're really having like some heartburn with something your partner, your spouse has done, that right there will indicate whether or not you're going to have a functional conversation or not. Because if you come in like a wrecking ball and you're trying to fight talk or spite talk, they're going to reactively listen and it will go nowhere. In fact, it'll get worse.
Yeah. And once somebody starts reacting like that, they become defensive. Because they're not going to hear the message at all, because they're going to try to do what they can to protect themselves. Because they're being attacked, they're going to pull out all the armor to protect rather than hear the message. And then the real message of what happened and what's going on gets lost, because soon then you're just shooting arrows and whatever and holding up shields progress. And there's not a progress.
The second horseman arises from a sense of superiority over your spouse, your partner. And, I want you to share with that what it is. And
so the contempt, attacking the sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. The anecdote to that one is building a culture of appreciation. Remind yourself of your partner's positive qualities and find gratitude for positive actions.
This is a hard one. And this can be subtle too. This can be done. Marissa and I have caught this in interactions with people that we've been, like maybe standing next to or maybe in the foyer at church, or overhearing things when a wife is really just talking down about their husband to like a third person. Like he always does this and I cannot believe him and he thinks this and, but it's a triangulation attempt to try and gain some kind of support. But what it actually does...
Get somebody else to understand, your bad position that you're in.
Yeah. What it does is it chips away at the emotional connection, only seeing the negative, choosing to see the negative. And that on its own, when you're trying to get up on your horse and kind of have some kind of superiority, it doesn't work that way, does it?
Yeah. So it's so important. Whatever, again, what you focus on, what you focus at, you bring about. So if you're focusing only on the negative in your spouse, that's all you're going to be able to see. I've been looking on the market for a new car, and there's a certain, like this Toyota RAV4 that I really like. And now what do? I see those everywhere I go. Yeah. It doesn't matter. And it's just what you think about that's what you see. So if you're really focusing on the negative, and everyone has negative things, so I understand, but where's your focus? And it's so important I've just had to learn to like, is that, behavior or whatever really that important to the life and longevity of our relationship? Or are there things that I can let go of? Yeah. Are there things that I shouldn't let go of? Yes, absolutely. But there's probably a lot of things that, I was nitpicking at the beginning of our relationship that I don't need to worry about. And again, if it's causing me stress and, contempt, then maybe I need to fix it rather than you.
That's the whose problem
is
it, right?
Really difficult.
Yeah,
right?
That's the whose problem is it.
Yeah.
So this could be something like as trivial as someone over or what have you, or even just like in front of your children when the husband gets into his car or goes into the wife's car, say, and he's like, your car is always such a mess. Like you do not take care of this thing. Like look how horrible like this thing is. Not realizing that she's got kids in and out. She's got pets in and out. She's got trips to the grocery store. Whereas you're just going to work. I think sometimes we have to really kind of take a step back. Like, what's the superiority complex even doing in a situation like this? Happens a lot, Marissa, in new families. And we had to have a little bit of a talk about this. And it wasn't anything devastating, but it was enough to bring to attention where, come home from work or school. And in my eyes, if the house was a mess and, dinner wasn't ready, I was like, sweet. That means that Marissa had an amazing experience with the kids, right? So because I'm working doesn't mean she's working any less hard. In fact, hers is probably more challenging because I get to get out and have time away. She doesn't. But it did come into play with me bike riding and doing some things that I thought was good for me and tried to use that. Well, I need this for these reasons. And, she's like, I need those things too. And so, yeah, it's like my job's so hard. It's not. I mean, it's even been a situation here at Addict to Athlete where Marissa is kind of the backbone of everything. I mean, it's the operations, it's the finances, it's the outreach, it's the communication. There's tons of stuff she does. I coach, I give a few lessons, and I, see some individual clients in therapy. Both of those are hard, but neither of us can go home and be like, I've worked harder than you, because they're both delicately, challenging in each area. So this is a big one, especially when you get a situation where you feel like you're being mistreated and you try to like, I'm the one that brings home the finances. Money. And so you need this.
Well, and I think sometimes I look at it, you are a really, really sloppy closet.
Be careful.
Bedroom.
This is going live.
Throws his clothes everywhere, doesn't pick up after himself. But guess what? I'm a very, very dirty, car owner. Often.
That's funny.
And what's so funny about that is that annoys you to death.
It's my ADHD.
A messy car is like the worst thing in the world to you. Mm-hmm. A messy room is the worst thing in the world to me. But it's also like, okay, well, who is it bothering? So when my car now gets so messy, you just go and clean it.
Yeah.
Rather than calling me names or saying, you're such a slob, you're such a mess, clean up your car. Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? Mm-hmm. You just kindly go and clean my car.
And you get me baskets to put my stuff in so I don't throw it around.
I help you keep the room clean. And I, often will start the laundry when it's overflowing and find the things that are dirty. And I've learned what works for you in keeping your closet organized. Is it to my standard of organized and clean? No. But there's some things I just, let it go.
Let it go.
Or I need to clean it. I need to fix it.
If it's bothering me. Yeah.
Instead of, you're such a mess, and looking at the positive, like, look at that trade. I do the closet, you do the car.
That was a hard thing to wrap my mind around. And it was Dr. Paul that kind of pointed it out finally when I was talking about the girls not turning off their light. And we've discussed this a million times on this podcast. Climbing up, 2 flights of stairs to go turn off their bathroom light, was me screaming at them of money that could be paid for power. We could be using for Disneyland trips as if. And so it became a kind of this part where I was getting super frustrated. And Dr. Paul says, Blu, whose problem is it? I'm like, it's their problem. He's like, really? He's like, is it though? Because they don't seem to care. You're the one losing your head and kind of like, on the premise of losing a relationship over a light. He's like, if you really hated it that bad, what would you do? I'm like, I go up there and turn it off. He's like, yeah, problem solved. Then it hit me. I'm like, yeah, I hate that so much. I'm going to climb up those stairs, but I didn't want to. I'd spend more time at the bottom yelling at them to turn it off than it would be for me to go up there.
Yeah. Because you think, but I need them to learn, or I want it to be better, that I don't have to go up there. Yeah, you can stay on that high horse. You can stay on that platform for as long as you want to scream and yell and fight about it.
Yep.
But again, where's the other person? They don't care. They may not care. That is not something that moves their needle on even a problem.
Yep.
And so, yeah, there's things you could do to maybe get them to turn off the lights a little bit more, or you just turn off the light. He said that.
He's like, how far are you willing to go? And I'm like, take out all the light bulbs. Yeah, you could do that, but then I don't want to do that because then I know I'm going to have to put them back in. You could rewire and put a switch on there so it's a timer, right? And so if they're in there for an hour and it clicks off, guess what? That's their fault for being in there for an hour. But I didn't want to do any of that either, so guess what we do?
Well, we got LED light bulbs, so it's much cheaper if they leave them on.
Yeah.
Or if you or I go up every time I walk by that bathroom, I have to go and turn all the lights off. And I'll give them credit.
There are times, maybe once or twice a month, that they turn it off themselves. But I'm like, is it worth risking the relationship over a light? It's not. And so, and I can't convince them to make it important. If it was that important to me, I'd go up there and turn it off, even if it's an inconvenience. So contempt is a bugger, and you got to be careful with it.
Yeah, because it's so easy to just get stuck and attack.
Again, old habits die super hard. And, it's that, at first you think it's funny, like, what do you think, this stuff grows on trees?
Yeah. But there's that give and take, what is it that you're good at that I'm not? What things am I good at that you're not? And so being able to focus on some of that culture of appreciation and gratitude and seeing the good parts is going to be so helpful to your relationship in the long run, rather than getting stuck in that mire of the things that you don't like, because that's all you'll see.
Yeah, the third horseman, dealing with defensiveness. Mm-hmm. If everything is a reaction and you are defensive simply because everything that is being dealt with in your relationship seems like it's an attack, we have a problem.
Yeah, so defensiveness, victimizing yourself to ward off perceived attack, reverse the blame, right? These are the ones, if people are coming at you saying something, you're going to become defensive and start attacking. So the antidote for that one is being able to take responsibility, accepting your partner's perspective, being able to hear and see their viewpoint and their insight, and offer an apology for any of your wrongdoing.
Yeah.
I've said this, you cannot have an argument, a disagreement, a fight without two people. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, you got to have mutual
if you're
combat.
with yourself. So that means every interaction, there's a problem on both sides. Because if you were alone, there probably isn't a problem within yourself, or at least you don't see it or think that. So there's got to be something somewhere. And being able to identify those things, that's one thing we've come to, is trying to identify, is it a 50-50 issue here? Is it a 70-30? Is it a 60-40? Is it a 95% is my fault and 5% is yours for engaging in the fight or whatever? Or there's always a percentage. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a conflict, because you can't have a conflict alone. So identify what your part is and accept that responsibility and try to maybe see. And does that take time? Absolutely. You may not be able to see your partner's perspective throughout.
Most of the time they won't want to. And I've noticed this a lot. Like, most couples come in with a clear and precise idea of who's the problem in the relationship, failing to recognize that they play a huge part in it. And it's never fun when you have to say, all right, so what part is yours? Well, we're not here about me. We're here because of him, or I'm here because of her. Yeah.
And Gottman, some of his research on how soon do people come into marriage counseling is usually 6 years. But that's 6 years of the problem. Yeah. It's 6 years of the defensiveness, the contempt, the resentment, the anger. And that's so late. That's so late in the game.
Yeah, it is.
Like I said, I'm so grateful we were able to identify some of your issues that got us into therapy, where we then could identify some of my issues that we could continue to work on through therapy.
You weren't perfect either. How about
right?
that? But this is a big one, because, this is where, defensiveness and that reactive listening go hand in hand. It's blame shifting. It's trying to avoid responsibility. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is take responsibility. And Marissa and I'm not even sure if, I remember utilizing this technique, but the more I hear about it even now, the more I realize that we kind of did that naturally, where we knew when we were wrong. We know when we've overstepped a boundary, when we've said something stupid or, maybe hurt that feeling. And you've got to be a pretty stone cold person to not really say, I stepped down a line there. And if you don't do that, then that means you're probably headed for number 4. And this is my favorite one. This is most men's favorite horseman to ride aside with. And that's the stonewalling, right? And this is where everything kind of coming at you, you're just like, fine. And I do this a lot.
Silent treatment.
It's a silent treatment. And I fall victim to this all the time. Because the hope is that they'll come just like whimpering and like apologizing and like, please speak to me, right? It's like Ralphie in the Christmas Story when his mom washes his mouth out with soap and, he comes back after years and like, you're blind. And he's like, you should have told us, Ralphie's stonewalling. So what's the antidote for this?
The antidote for this one is physiological self-soothing. Take a break, spend that time doing something soothing and distracting. So this may look a little similar for a time being that, the silent treatment, you're withdrawing. But if you're withdrawing and being able to calm, to recenter, to be able to maybe look at the things differently, then you can come back and say, hey, I'm sorry, or I handled that incorrectly, or, really, I think in a lot of ways too, one thing that's helped us, even it seems so dumb, is like just being able to like text each other, like,
oh yeah, that's a
from
big part.
Upstairs to downstairs, like, sorry about that.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. It's like an easier way to like break the ice rather than, because sometimes it is hard to come out and say, I screwed up, rather than just like, let's forget it, ignore it, and pretend it never happened and keep moving forward. That's not good either.
So I like the way that Gottman put this. He says, in marriages where discussions begin with a harsh startup, right? Meaning like you get home and then it's just like attack. Where the criticism, the contempt, and the defensiveness, and all those things are kind of cross-smacking you, that kind of trumpets the 4th horseman. He says, think of it like this. A husband comes home from work and gets met with a barrage of criticism from his stay-at-home wife and responds by just turning on the TV. Like, oh, just blocking her out. Less than responsive, right? She starts yelling at him, and then eventually he just gets up and leaves the room. So rather than confronting his wife, like head on, right? He does that just by turning away, and he thinks he's avoiding the fight. But really, he's kind of avoiding the whole marriage, right? He's kind of become that stonewaller. And most of us guys, that's what we do. We stop talking and we leave.
And then the spouse takes that as you don't care, and this isn't important to you, rather than... Yeah.
He says, although husbands and wives can both stonewall, research indicates that this behavior is far more common among men in marriage than it is women. And I think that's kind of interesting. Stonewalling doesn't mean you're just giving them the silent treatment either. It's maybe she's trying to converse with you and you just give her the, yeah, or
where you're not really listening.
Exactly. It's very obvious. And so when it talks about that ability to kind of like make a physiological like change and to like take some time for some self-soothing, whether it's, outside gardening or whatnot. And it's typically what we do. I mean, I've done that before where I'm like, let's go outside and start like doing something. And then it's like
angry cleaning. That happens.
Yeah, then it's like, oh, oops. Yeah.
And then you can calm down, maybe see it a little differently and come back.
Yeah.
But just being able to like discuss it. Another thing that I think we've learned to do, because sometimes, again, in the heat of the moment, it's really difficult to think straight. And, we've talked about that with anger. When you get angry, you have the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response. And that takes the blood that's all over your body and it moves it to your extremities so you can do what you need to. And that means you're not going to think straight. So
literally you can't.
Yeah, you can't. So being able to calm down is really helpful. And we've had a few little keywords sometimes that we've come up with and said, when this happens, we're just going to say this. And that means
time out. Yeah.
Stop, time out, break. Go this way, you go that way.
And it's never, I'm done, or like, well, maybe we should get a divorce. Like, it's never one of those stupid ones because that's dumb. Don't use
and
those.
It's never, and it's not, it's a term, it's a sentence that doesn't have to do with either of us. It's kind of mute, like in the middle. And so it doesn't feel like I'm saying this because you need to fix something. It's just, we're saying this as this is our timeout. Take a break, think about this separately. And no one takes it personally as an attack.
So in an established relationship, if you think of how, again, John can predict these outcomes, he looks for those harsh startups, right? Those harsh startups could be just, again, right when the individual walks into the room, just full on you riding alongside one of the horsemen.
And I do that one a lot because I get things just going and I have my list and then, he's home.
Harsh startups all the time. You do that so much. And my ADHD brain in the morning, she's like nailing me with all these stuff that has to happen. I'm like,
my brain works so much better in the morning.
Figure out what you're saying.
So I have my list of.
So if the harsh startup in a conversation brings in that stage 2 with one of the horsemen, the third is flooding. And the third, you get flooded when your spouse negative response is so intense that it kind of leaves you with this shell-shocked mindset, like, holy crap, like that was a lot heavier. Maybe you're like, hey, still needing some help with the garbage or whatever, and then just boom, lays it out, and you're like, what in the world? It's like being emotionally waterboarded. Does that make sense?
Overwhelmed.
And it's like then you try to do anything you can to never cross that line again, because you're like, dang, that was not a good thing. And John also goes on to say the fourth sign is just the body language. It's the way that individuals kind of like conduct the quiet time, the comfortable silence, if you will. It's like, what are they doing? I've watched social media things about this dude analyzing photos about the lean in and lean out, and there's some stuff to that. But this is even more so just subtle interactions, the way that touching when you're sitting,
you turn into each other rather than turning out, and that's not just physically, but as you watch certain indicators from your spouse, or they're talking about something, that maybe you even check in with that later on in the conversation. Mm-hmm. That shows a way of caring that you've been following, that you've been listening, and that you're kind of redirecting back to something you heard earlier in the conversation.
Exactly. I see this pretty brilliantly in my office because there's a couch that usually the couple sit on. And you can tell pretty quick if they're upset with each other just by the way they cross their legs and point away. It's pretty interesting. And then slowly, as we're processing, as we're talking, and as we're identifying some of these horsemen and whatnot, you can see them start to lean in towards each other. And so the body language is interesting. But then the final and fifth one is that there's always been some kind of failed repair attempt that's been made but hasn't worked. And a lot of that's because it's kind of a try to put a one size fits all kind of like solution into a very custom situation. Does that make sense? And you can't do that. You've got to be able to look at all right, we keep having this conversation. What's not sinking in, right? And it could be because there's still that contempt there. There's some defensiveness there. Maybe some stonewalling, whatever. But those past attempts haven't really had success. And if you haven't had counseling up to this point, the chances of you really engaging in it, very slim. Most people are, get stuck in their bad memories.
So I have a couple things, a little list here that Gottman gives on what are some signs and signals that you and your partner could benefit from couples counseling. So one of the first ones is the escalating conflict and nasty communication habits.
Yeah.
Emotional distance and loneliness, feeling like you're falling out of love. I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
The second stage. Yep.
Trust and commitment issues, such as difficulty relying on a partner or not putting each other's well-being on par with each other. Attachment insecurities that are grounded in feelings of low self-worth and fears of abandonment. This can include extreme dependence, which leads to intrusive behaviors, but can also include extreme independence, which can make a partner feel like they're not even a priority. Feeling unsupported and emotionally dismissed, or difficulty with opening up emotionally. And again, these are things you want when you start seeing that, not years down the road. I mean, but if you're years down the road, still go get help. But these are early signs that you can go right when you see it. Sexual intimacy is practically non-existent. There's a lack of desire it's rarely talked about. Difficulties with in-laws, friendships, work, or life stressors, including health issues. It's a good time to look into counseling. Abuse, affairs, addiction, obviously those are going to bring issues. Differences in parenting styles that lead to conflict. There's so much from your childhood that you've been raised with when you come together with someone else and trying to learn how to address parenting. Sometimes it's things that come out naturally that you don't even recognize. It's a good idea. Those are things that need to be discussed and talked about. Mismanagement and disagreement on finances.
See how far down the list that is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Things feeling unfair in the division of household chores. Untreated anxiety and depression issues that complicate things in a relationship. Unequal decision making.
That's a big one.
That's a really big one. Whether it's somebody else is always doing the hand that comes down with the kids, and the dad shows up, as they call it, even in divorce, Disneyland dad just comes and takes them for the fun stuff. But like trying to manage some of that. Difficult childhood upbringings that have emotionally wounded partners and make it difficult to trust your partner or stay engaged when conflicts arise.
It's a big one too.
Yeah. Like any trauma, like just go get counseling. Go at the beginning. I think every new relationship should.
I think so too.
Therapy,
it's so beneficial. I don't think half of the stuff that we would have experienced would have probably ended the way that it did through counseling if we would have tried to do it on our own. I think that would have been some heavy heartbreak.
Well, and I also think there's still so many things that you would have kept close to your chest. There were things that were exposed to me to find out some of the things you had been lying about. But I think you would have let me know of that and then held other things back.
Yeah.
And then what continues to come from that.
Yeah, and no relationship can function with those kind of skeletons in the closet. It just doesn't work
out that way.
And
if parents start splitting, and that's even with kids stepping in. I remember I had a childhood friend that mom would always say this, dad would always say that, and they would just learn which one they could go to.
Parent shop.
Yeah, we do that in our house a little bit, but I remember one time this mom had laid this rule that was straight and forward, and then dad snuck around and gave the daughter the credit card to go. I mean, like it got extreme and then brought in finances. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine like the frustration. Like that's just going to cause so many issues, but then also with the kids and their relationship with you and as parents. So there's a lot.
That snuck
Parenting
in the
is hard.
granola bars after you said kitchen was closed because they wouldn't eat their dinner. And again, that just stems from childhood trauma. It's like, me being too close to that feeling of like neglect.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Not having
and we had to talk about that.
Food. And we had to discuss it. Like if we have food in our cupboards, he can eat. Yeah. He's fine.
Absolutely. I mean, even with medication that they've had to take, I'm like, I don't know. So it's one of these things where if it kind of feels heavy, there's no sense in trying to do it alone. Like get some help and be picky about the people that you choose. I mean, we're coming off the heels of that stupid idiot, Jody Hildebrandt and connections that as we're hearing more information come out, like she put a wedge in that relationship and did some heinous things that I'm thinking.
Not only to the kids, but the marriage. And the relationship was horrible too.
I put a little video out on that, making sure that people were picky with the people they choose. The therapist is there for you. You're not there for them. And they should never be pushing their morals and values and beliefs on you. They need to stay neutral because it's hard to find a good one that can stay neutral. Most times people don't want to come into counseling because they're afraid that the therapist will pick sides. And the therapist should never pick sides. Even if there is a clear and distinct side, there needs to be a mutual engagement and an ability to stay neutral.
Like they're the mediator, and the mediator is not there to pick sides. They're there to share information and help you guys come together and see things correctly.
So if you're
feeling that way, then
they're crap.
Find a new one.
They're crap therapists. They should never be picking sides. They can give you thoughts and advice, but not like, push that stuff on you. I mean, a therapist should never even say, you need to get a divorce. I mean, that is crossing the lines. They could say, if you decide to leave or if you decide to stay, but they should never say you need to. Because... And
if you ever feel like this isn't working, maybe they're a great therapist, but there's just a person, like you just don't think that you're engaged. Sometimes I know I've heard of people just staying with that therapist because they don't want to hurt their feelings.
Oh my gosh.
This is not about feelings.
No.
Sorry. It's about your health. It's your mental health. And the therapist, if they're a professional, that should not hurt their feelings.
No.
And if it does, that's
move
on.
You.
That's not what they're getting paid for. So, ask around. There's a lot of different ways, but trial and error works too. And I think you can learn something even in therapy sessions with, somebody that's not working great.
One of the best things you can learn is to go back and find the podcast. And I think I've done it on Patreon as well. And I've got some stuff outside of that I use in my private practice, which is the breakdown and the understanding of how to core communicate, going through all 4 styles of communication and listening and how to apply it. Once you become, semi-expert in that, you've got it made. And if you guys want more information on that, let us know. But we've done podcasts and we've done a bunch of stuff that has those 4 styles in there. So I highly recommend going back and listening to those as a foundation to help eliminate the horseman's arrival. So
helps with all
There you have it.
relationships, not just
Yeah.
marriage. But
There you have it. So, listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks so much for the questions. I appreciate the outreach. Continue to share this podcast with anybody that may be struggling with mental health addictions, just needs a little, maybe understanding on something, and keep reaching out to us. We'd love to answer your questions either through this, and we have the ability now to start taking calls. I think that we can start multitasking enough to start bringing like live calls on here. So don't be a stranger. If you got something on your mind, let us know. If we don't answer on the air, we'll definitely get it to you through direct messaging, right? DMing.
yeah,
right?
email us the question.
Absolutely. So until next time, everybody, do your best, turn your mess into your message.